let's sing our Great Ife anthem. 1, 2, 3, go. Louder. Africa's most beautiful campus. Culture, vigilant, progressive. Salute against all oppression. Forward ever, backward never. For learning and culture, struggle and struggle. Great Ife, I love you.
Great Ife, Great Ife, Africa's most beautiful campus. Cautious, vigilant, progressive, alert against all oppression. Forward ever, backward never, for learning and culture, sports and struggle. Great Ife, I love you. There's only one Great Ife in the universe. Another Great Ife is a counterfeit. Great, 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 great. Great Ife, Great Ife, Africa's most beautiful campus. Cautious, vigilant, progressive, alert against all oppression. Forward ever, backward never, for learning and culture, sports and struggle. Great Ife, I love you. There's only one Great Ife in the universe. Another Great Ife is a counterfeit. Great, 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 great.
The university itself is strange to the Yoruba culture. The very idea of the university, just bringing some people in separate from the town. You know that the university itself is separate from the town. The city is far away. In fact, the people in the city, they refer to this as campus. When they are coming here, it's like a sacred space that they...
Sacred space or
Yes.
gated community?
It's a gated community, all right, but it's one that they have respect for.
On my first day as a student, it was most impressive because they drive, the way we drove in from the main gate of the campus towards the campus. After making a bend, a panoramic view of the whole campus was just before us. I like the idea that the buildings move up and down with the landscape, undulates, steps here, there, you know, it just fitted into the landscape without destroying it. The hill behind gave it a very good background. I thought it was most beautiful.
For many, this collection of buildings would have seemed like just a picturesque place, a place where you see the buildings as background. But here, you live with these buildings, and the buildings themselves, you become part of it. very difficult when you take a typology that is not part of us and you use the international style as the basis for embedding it in an African context.
This is not modern architecture, just replicating what you have, you know, Bauhaus or wherever. No, this is modern architecture that must fit West Africa, that must fit Nigeria. It's not like some kind of pastiche. You're now trying to put Yoruba on top of Western and there's a discordant tune. No, everything flows together. The buildings are not oppressively massive, like you had the early colonial expressions of architecture of power. Some of the buildings are huge in terms of form, but they are made light, very friendly, very artistically expressive.
If you take, for example, the architecture of palaces, like the one in Oyo, and the one in Akure, and the one in Ile-iIe, we have these posts that are prominent at the veranda, or what is called the portico of this traditional system. You know, we have this that is prominent. But you know what has happened on the campus is that you have an integration of these sculptures in a different way in this modernist interpretation. It is different from Nigerian architecture. But when one goes into the detail of it, there's an attempt to also integrate some traditional elements in terms of super graphics and the decorations on the wall.
Even at the beginning of the library building, as you climb up, you will see the obelisk that is here. It's a reference to the Opa Oromiyan, the staff of the Oromiyan in Ife.
The courtyard system that we are used to in the traditional Nigerian architecture was interpreted in a new way. You have courtyards in the buildings themselves. It's a range of courtyards, as if there's a transition from a small scale to a medium scale and to a larger scale.
Now, you see, the open space that we find here, it's endeared itself so much, the students call it motion ground. You keep moving. And if you look at the history of the university, it's like the courtyard in Oxford University, where you have to cross in a reverential manner. What I do understand by this, certainly it goes beyond this campus. The international style itself is appropriated in many places. It's used the way that the locals, they understand it. It's formal where it ought to be formal, and it's informal. Some people have compared some of the buildings with a train station. They are very long, but to stand at one end and see somebody at the other end, there's something very African about the idea that collectively you can see yourselves. You don't enter the building straight, you go into the building and it creates a small space for you to actually assemble before you begin to take the staircase. And in the original thing, there were no doors. It just means that the external flows into the internal. Some don't like it, but the experience is wonderful.
You could see that most of the buildings on campus have the north-south orientation. That means they were longer in the east-west direction to capture the southwest winds, to make sure that the infiltration of the sun was minimal. There's a lot of attempt to protect the openings to make sure that there's no direct infiltration of solar radiation.
If we're going to have microclimates that are conducive to learning and to teaching, they must recognize that there is the subsisting climate and not seek to oppose it. We're here now, and you can see stack effects being employed. The whole of the ground floor is free. There is a courtyard in the middle. The air is at liberty to move around. You have fenestration on the two sides of all the spaces. Even without recourse to active energy, the spaces work. These air conditioners we have all over the place, as far as I'm concerned, they are more of a prestige. If I go back to my own time, we were just compact and manageable. Now we have this student population explosion. I think we are about 2.5 times what was ever envisaged. So you're having spaces that were never meant for teaching being appropriated, such as what we have under the amphitheater. Now we have 2 quite sizable lecture theaters carved out of that space. We even have the amphitheater itself serving as a lecture space. We have parts of the sports center also servicing didactic exchanges. It isn't a love of the open, it's a constraint imposed by lack of space.
This is the assembly hall. It's called the Ytudy Hall. It's in fact the building that marks the campus. The plastic nature of the concrete is well demonstrated, and it can only be read as a piece of sculpture. It's welcoming you and gradually leading you to the internal space itself. It's a beautiful way to flow. Everyone flows with it. You also see the display of open spaces. On the upper floor, they appear like large windows, bearing nothing, no glass, nothing whatsoever. And that as you go along, you begin to sense the cascade of stairs. It's reminiscent of open spaces that the Yoruba use in many ways. You go to the palace, you'll find the open space. That is the place for meeting. You go through it, and from it, you can get to other spaces. There is always an open space that introduces you to the larger space. Once you come here, you know that you are part of a very big thing. So you don't feel claustrophobic in a place where you can have 1,000 people coming in at the same time. In fact, to see people who are together, you know, as they converse and go into the hall itself, it's a beauty to behold. It's like it contains life itself, where life is being played out.
University of Ife, when it was first conceived, a lot of land was appropriated. Till date, I'm aware that at least 6 villages are still within the Obafemi Awolowo University land, and they don't realize it. Should the university need that particular tract of land, they have to be evacuated. The truth of the matter was, when originally this campus was being developed, it was far from the madding crowd, outside the core area. But events have overtaken that. There are developments all the way to Osogbo, and the university has a running battle trying to reclaim its land. So the town has overrun the university now. It's no longer kind of, being aloof. Ivory tower, you look up to it, no way.
Arieh Sharon chose the site for the campus because of its landscape. He wanted to preserve it as much as possible, and he was considering this less as a town, as an ideal city, as many campuses are built, but more of a rural or rural-urban hybrid. So the buildings were planted in the landscape as if they were, for example, kibbutz, a dining hall and lecture hall where the social and cultural activities preside. He was mesmerized by the landscape, which I think was for him kind of the land of milk and honey, of the Zionist trope that he could see there in nature. So the tropics there was really the land of milk and honey in the Israeli Zionist fantasy.
At that time, to have infused the idea of tropical architecture, of living within the tropics, was a very distinct thing. We had something to compare with, which was UI, University of Ibadan. The first university in Nigeria was essentially an invention of the British. And it were, of course, Maxwell Fry and Jane Drew that were the West African architects. You find a lot of their work in Ghana and in Nigeria. For them, UI was a special case. Coming to Nigeria, because Nigeria was special even to the British. You see some ideas in UI, but for University of Ibadan, it was at a smaller scale, because if you look at this university, you see a grandiose scale of modern architecture.
The British discourse on the tropics that Maxwell Fry and Jane Drew were the promoters of in the field of architecture was really a reflection of the British in Africa. There was the Department of Tropical Architecture at the JAIYEOBA established at the time, and Fry and Drew were the main professors. The first book that was published in 1956, before independence, presents a problem of acclimatization. But acclimatization of whom? It is the problem of the white colonial administrator rather than of the natives. The entire idea of human comfort, as was conceived by the British and the Americans, which first evolved as a way to improve the conditions for workers in factories in order for them to be more productive, this entire approach needed to be reconceived according to the standards of the African students. Therefore, there was a clash between the idea of the post-colonial university and the one that was presented by the late colonial one in Ibadan.
I don't think it is quite right to think that it is post-colonial.
Okay, it's still colonial.
It is still part of that process. In fact, it's a very strange thing about the campus that it was invented as a kind of protest against the federal government. There is a commission that is called the Ashby Commission. They did not want a second university to exist in Western region. It was the typical ethnic problems of Nigeria. But the people in the Western region wanted it. And they wanted the best of it. They wanted a university that was typically a Yoruba university.
the university commissioners wanted to propose an alternative to the university campus Ibadan. What they were interested in was establishing a university that would rival the federal elitist university with a more democratic university that would cater the needs of the region. They looked for a different model of a curriculum, but also a different model of architecture. So Sharons' challenge was twofold. First, he needed to design a university that would be no less modernist than the design of University Campus Ibadan, which was hailed at the time as the most modern building you can possibly have in the region. And the second problem was how to do it without repeating their climate design approach. Between 62 and 65, there was no construction going on, and I think it also let Sharon some time to rethink his planning. If the very early designs show a regular rectangular building in the modernist style, then you see a revision already a year later of changing to the reverse pyramid as an answer addressing the climate. But also there was an involvement from 1966 to 1969 by the Department of Landscape Architecture at the University of Wisconsin. They were consultants on behalf of USAID. They brought in the climate research heads-on. Very interestingly, for this project, Arieh Sharon rejected the brise soleil and other sun shading devices, which he rendered basically as ornament. This was a direct critique, I think, in my interpretation of Maxwell Fry and Jane Drew's design for the University of Ibadan.
It's the story of a will on the part of the Western region government, the will to build, to use architecture as a platform for many things. And fortunately, they had a good partner in Sharon. There are all sorts of problems associated with modern architecture. A flat roof may not be the best in a place where it's raining cats and dogs at a particular time. It gives way easily, and at some point or the other. We've had to put covering on those roofs, but if you don't look carefully, you won't see them. Even here in the library, we've covered it, but we ensure that you can't see it. You can't see it because the architecture mustn't be destroyed. To agree that we all love this architecture, to accept it, and to use it as a basis for discussion is a wonderful thing because we disagree on many things. In the university, we can be very violent about our disagreements, but on this architecture, we all agree.